All right, first page of chapter 6 notes. Hopefully you checked out the formula sheet briefly for at least the intro and maybe go back to it later. Notice the title of this is Ratios, Cosecant, Secant, and Cotangent. We went over these ratios back in the introduction to trigonometry a couple of chapters ago. And we remember that cosecant, CSC, I'm just going to write some formulas down at the top before I go through these notes. CSC x equals 1 over sine x. Remembering the one with the C first flips with the one with the S first. Not to confuse that rule with the T's. Now, secant x is equal to 1 over cos x. The one with the S first flips with the one with the C first. And cotan x is equal to 1 over tan x. And as we spoke about in the formulas, it's also equal to cos x over sine x, because tan is sine over cosine, and if you flip and multiply, it becomes cos over sine. But we've talked about that enough. So I'm not going to go through all these notes. Let's just read it. It says sine x over sine x equals 1, obviously. Sine squared x, which off to the right in a box, sine squared x is equal to sine x times, sine x times sine x. I'm going to put a box around that one. That's something I've mentioned once before, but new. Therefore, that second example in the note, sine squared x over sine x, well, if sine squared x is just sine x times sine x, and it's over a sine x, it simplifies to just be sine x. And there's a whole bunch of examples that are so similarly related to grade 9 exponents. Once you see it that way, it simplifies so much easier. So in that second section, let's take the first example, sine x over 1. Sine x, well, it's really just sine x, times 1 over cos x. Yeah, there's a 1 on the bottom, but whatever. So, multiply the top, multiply the bottom. Sine x times 1 is simply sine x. Notice I go down the page. 99% of the time, go down the page. 1 times cos x is cosine x. And I know sine x over cosine x is, for my formula sheet, simply tan x, which we spoke about a bunch in the last 2 chapters. So, an example off to the right, sine x times tan x. Notice they're just right side by side, doesn't matter. And I know tan x from the previous example or from the formula sheet is sine over cos, so I'm going to rewrite sine x. And I'm going to replace tan x with sine x over cos x. So that simplifies to be sine x times sine x is sine squared x. And I'm going to put sine over 1 to remind me not to accidentally times the cos on the bottom by anything other than the denominator 1 over cos x. Is that more simplified than earlier? Maybe. Maybe not, depending on what you want. So, off to the right, there's a bunch more examples of simplification. Let's go down to the next section. So we have sine x over tan x. Sine x over tan x. Now, this tan x on the denominator, I'm going to put brackets around the tan because I'm going to work on it. And I'm going to say sine x over, and tan is sine x over cos x. And I'm going to put brackets around the substitution so I can confirm that I successfully substituted sine over cos for tan, its definition, which we've talked about twice already in this video and 100 times before. Now, I'm dividing fractions, so I can flip and multiply. Now, I'm going to do this off to the right for the first time. So I'm going to take exactly what I have at this moment. Sine x over sine x over cos x. And be careful which one's your big over and your small over, and it usually helps you write it with brackets. Well, I know that's a division statement, so I can write it differently. Sine x divided by the denominator. I'm going to write it with brackets so it looks very similar. Now I know I'm dividing, and I know from grade 8 that I can flip the second fraction and change to multiply. So sine x times cos x over sine x. They cancel, and I'm left with cosine x. So cosine x is going to be the answer. Now, back to the example on the left. Well, I could show all those steps, but I'm going to waste a lot of paper, and it can be difficult for me to follow steps when teachers are doing things very quickly. So again, back to the left. It's sine big divided by over sine over cos. So I'm dividing by sine over cos. So couldn't I just cross it off and change it to flip and multiply? Cos x over sine x? Why not? Now I have a sine x on the top and the bottom. I can cross them off. And my answer is simply cos x. The same answer I got on the right with a lot less work. I didn't even have to rewrite it down below just to kind of clarify the picture above. But in the cheat sheets in the beginning, there's a few examples of flip and multiply, how we work with big words like fractions and factoring, etc. We need to be very good at these steps, so we don't want a big red off to the right be having to do this many steps as it took in the size of this. Barely rewriting, just flipping and multiplying. So, as we can see, it's cos x, and there is a whole bunch more examples of notes on that page. Be really, really careful with which ones you're big over and which ones you're small over. And be really good at dividing and flip and multiply. And have a really good knowledge of all your basic big blue at the top trigonometric identities. Basically memorizing the formula sheet, however you will probably have it.